The moment my daughter's wheelchair flipped forward and she hit the ground, I felt something inside me break in a way I had never experienced before. Not anger, not fear, but something deeper, something colder. Because I knew this was not an accident. This was done on purpose, and the person standing across the street watching with folded arms already knew exactly what she had done. If you are new here, make sure you like and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily, because stories like this show how far people can go when they think they have power and how fast everything can turn against them. My daughter Emma is 12 years old. She is smart, funny, stronger than anyone I know, but she uses a wheelchair after an accident years ago, and that ramp in front of our house was not just wood and metal, it was her freedom, her way to move, her way to live like every other kid in the neighborhood. We had that ramp built properly, with permits, with approval, with everything done the right way, because I do things by the book, always have, always will, and for months everything was fine until Karen moved into the house across the street. Karen was the kind of person who believed rules were not just rules, they were weapons. She walked around like she owned the entire neighborhood, like every house, every driveway, every person existed under her control. And the moment she saw that wheelchair ramp, she didn't see accessibility. She saw something she could complain about. At first, it started. Small comments about property lines, about how the ramp looked, about how it did not match the neighborhood standards. I ignored it because people like her feed on reactions, and I was not going to give her that satisfaction. But then the notices started. Appearing on our door, warnings about violations, claims that the ramp was unauthorized, even though we had all the paperwork, and every time I showed proof, she would just smile like it didn't matter, like she had already decided the outcome. My wife tried to stay calm. She kept saying maybe it will pass, maybe she will stop, but I could see the stress building every time Karen walked by, every time she stared at Emma like she was some kind of inconvenience instead of a child. And then one morning, everything changed. I came home early from work, something I almost never do, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not normal quiet, but something wrong, something off. And as I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. The ramp was gone. Not damaged, not broken completely, cut off, removed like it had never been there for a second. My mind refused to process what I was seeing because no one would do something like that. Not to a disabled child, not in broad daylight, not in a neighborhood full of witnesses. But then I heard my daughter scream. I ran toward the front door and saw her lying on the ground, her wheelchair tipped over her hands, shaking, trying to push herself up, and my wife kneeling beside her. Panicking, Emma had tried to leave the house like she always does. She expected the ramp to be there like it always was, but instead there was nothing, just a drop straight down to the concrete. And she fell in that moment. Everything slowed down, the sound of my wife calling her name. The look of fear in Emma's eyes, the scrape marks on the ground, and then my eyes moved across the street. Karen was standing there watching. No shock, no concern, no regret. Just that same cold expression, like she was observing something she had planned. Walked straight toward her, not running, not shouting, just walking, because I needed to hear it from her. I needed to see if she would actually admit it, and she did. She said the ramp was a violation. She said she had reported it. She said someone must have removed it. And then she smiled and said maybe now we would finally follow the rules. That was the moment I knew this was not about rules. This was about control. Neighbors had started coming outside, some whispering, some watching, but no one stepping in, because that is what fear does. It keeps people quiet even when they know something is wrong. I called for an ambulance while my wife stayed with Emma, and every second waiting felt longer than the last, because all I could think about was how this could have been avoided, how one decision, one selfish act had put my daughter in danger. When the paramedics arrived, they moved fast, checking her injuries, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher, and I stayed right beside her, holding her hand. While she tried to stay strong, but I could see it in her eyes, she was scared, and that is something no parent ever forgets. As they took her to the ambulance, I turned back one more time, and Karen was still there, still watching like nothing had happened. Like this was just another day. What she didn't understand was that this was not just a complaint anymore. This was not a simple disagreement. This was something much bigger, because when you cross a line like that, when you put a child in danger on purpose, you don't just break rules. You wake up consequences you never saw coming, and Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The hospital hallway felt colder than it should have been. and every second waiting for the doctor felt heavier than the last, because when something like this happens, your mind does not stop. It keeps replaying the moment over and over again. The fall, the sound, the look on your child's face, and the one person responsible standing there like it meant nothing. Emma was taken in for scans and tests while I sat beside my wife trying to stay calm, but inside I was already making decisions. Not emotional ones, not rushed ones, but clear, focused decisions, because what happened was not just wrong, it was illegal. The doctor finally came out and said Emma was going to be okay, some bruising, some pain, but no permanent damage, and for a moment the weight lifted just enough for me to breathe again. But relief does not erase what happened. It only reminds you. What could have happened? While my wife stayed with Emma, I stepped outside the hospital and made a call, not to the HOA, not to a local office, but to someone who deals with cases where people abuse power and cross legal boundaries that protect families, like mine. Because what Karen did was not just a violation of community rules. It was a direct violation of federal disability protection laws, and that changes everything. By the time I got home that evening, the street felt different, quieter, like people knew something serious was coming, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Karen was outside again, acting like nothing had happened, talking to a neighbor as if she had not just caused a child to be taken to the hospital. I walked past her without a word because I was done talking. The next morning it started. 2 official vehicles pulled up. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and precise, the kind of presence that makes people pay attention without needing to make noise. Investigators stepped out and walked straight to Karen's house. At first she looked confused, then annoyed, and then slowly. That confidence she always carried started to fade as they began asking questions, showing documents and pointing toward my house. Neighbors started gathering again, but this time the energy was different. No whispers, no fear, just curiosity and something else, something closer to accountability. Karen tried to argue at first, saying she was enforcing rules, saying the ramp was not allowed, but that argument did not last long because everything she said was already documented. Everything she did had witnesses, and more importantly, what she removed was not just a structure. It was a legally protected accessibility feature that changes the situation completely. Within minutes, her tone shifted from confident to defensive and then to quiet. She was informed that removing that ramp without authorization, especially knowing its purpose, was considered a serious violation, one that caused harm and could lead to multiple charges, including endangerment and discrimination. For the first time since she moved into that neighborhood, Karen had nothing to say. No smile, no control, no power, just silence. Later that day, she was escorted away for further questioning, not in handcuffs, not yet, but in a way that made it clear this was no longer her game to control. The HOA quickly distanced itself, statements were made, apologies were sent, but none of that mattered to me because this was never about fines or rules. This was about my daughter. Within the next few days, the case moved fast. Evidence was clear, timelines matched witness statements, supported everything, and Karen's actions spoke for themselves. The ramp was rebuilt immediately, stronger, safer, and fully protected under proper legal oversight, making sure nothing like this could ever happen again. Emma came home a few days later, still recovering but smiling again, and that was all that mattered in that moment. But the story did not. And there Karen faced the consequences of her actions legally and publicly. Her reputation in the neighborhood was gone. The same people who once stayed quiet now spoke openly about what happened, about what they saw, and about how things should have been handled from the start, and that is how it always goes. People stay silent until someone is forced to speak. I never celebrated what happened, because there is nothing to celebrate when a child gets hurt. But I did make sure one thing was clear. No one has the right to take away someone else's safety, especially not a child who already faces more challenges than most. Weeks later, life slowly returned to normal. Emma was back to her routine, moving freely, using the new ramp stronger than before, and the neighborhood finally felt like a place where people looked out for each other instead of controlling each other. One evening, we sat outside watching the sunset. and Emma looked at me and smiled in a way that told me everything was going to be okay, and that was enough. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about how important it is to stand up when something is wrong, then share it with someone else.